Welcome to Cognitive Spirals, exploring the latest research into consciousness, cognition, and machine intelligence. Today, we're diving into the concept of an AI co-scientist. It's a broad topic, but fascinating, especially as AI becomes more integrated into research.
Yeah, I'm excited about this one. The idea of having an AI that can actually contribute meaningfully to scientific discovery. It's almost science fiction, but also feels incredibly close.
I'm a bit more skeptical, I think. The term co-scientist implies a level of understanding and creativity that I'm not sure current AI, particularly deep learning-based AI, is capable of.
Well, that's the question, isn't it? How far away are we, really? And what are the fundamental roadblocks? I think we can get there, but it's going to require some serious rethinking of our approaches.
Okay, so let's unpack that. What kind of tasks are we envisioning for this AI co-scientist? Are we talking about automated literature reviews, hypothesis generation, experimental design, all of the above?
I think it's all of the above eventually. Right now, AI is pretty good at sifting through massive data sets, finding patterns that humans might miss. So, literature reviews, definitely. But I think we're already seeing AI assist with hypothesis generation, even if it's just suggesting potential correlations.
But correlation isn't causation, and that's where I think the current approaches fall short. An AI can identify a correlation between, say, two genes and a disease, but can it explain why that correlation exists? Can it propose a plausible mechanism?
Okay, but that's just a matter of complexity, right? The more data we feed these models, the better they become at understanding those underlying mechanisms. Look at AlphaFold, for example. It can predict protein structures with incredible accuracy, which is a huge step towards understanding how those proteins function.
That's a great example, Otto. But even with AlphaFold, there's still a black box element. We understand the input and the output, but the reasoning process is still opaque. We don't fully understand how it arrives at its predictions. And I think that's Sarah's point, right? Transparency is crucial for scientific understanding.
Exactly. It's not enough to just get the right answer. We need to understand the reasoning behind it. That's why I think we need to move beyond purely data-driven approaches and incorporate more symbolic reasoning. Neuro-symbolic AI, for example, could combine the pattern recognition capabilities of neural networks with the logical inference of symbolic systems.
I agree with Sarah to a point. Deep learning is impressive, but it's brute force. It needs tons and tons of data. I suspect the real breakthroughs will come when we can encode fundamental principles into these systems. Things like physics, maybe even some basic common sense reasoning about how the world works in space and time.
But isn't that what deep learning is implicitly doing? By training on massive data sets, it's learning the underlying structure of the world, the relationships between objects and events. It's just doing it in a distributed, non-symbolic way.
Maybe, but I think Donald's point is that it's doing it in a very inefficient way. It's like trying to learn physics by memorizing every possible experimental outcome, rather than understanding the underlying laws.
Exactly. Think about how a physicist formulates a problem. They don't just throw a bunch of data at it. They start with a model, a set of equations that describe the system, and then they use data to refine that model. Current AI, it's mostly just the data part.
And that's why I think we need to incorporate more symbolic reasoning. Think about medical diagnosis. A doctor doesn't just look at a patient's symptoms and blindly apply a statistical model. They use their knowledge of anatomy, physiology, and pathology to reason about the possible causes of the symptoms.
Right. But you could argue that the doctor's brain is just a very complex neural network that's been trained on years of medical experience. The symbolic reasoning is just an emergent property of that network.
Possibly. But if that's the case, then we need to figure out how to build neural networks that can exhibit that kind of emergent symbolic reasoning in a more transparent and controllable way. And I think that's where neuro-symbolic approaches become really interesting.
The key, I think, is finding the right level of abstraction. We don't want to hard code everything, but we also don't want to rely solely on brute force learning. We need to find a way to encode fundamental principles, but also allow the system to learn from data and adapt to new situations.
So, going back to the idea of an AI co-scientist, what would that look like in practice? Let's say we're trying to develop a new drug. How would this AI help us?
Well, ideally, it would start by reviewing the existing literature, not just identifying relevant papers, but also understanding the key concepts and relationships. Then, it would use its knowledge of biochemistry and pharmacology to propose potential drug targets and design molecules that could interact with those targets.
And it would need to be able to simulate the effects of those molecules in a virtual environment, taking into account the complex interactions between different cells and tissues. It needs a spatiotemporal understanding of the system.
And then it would analyze the results of experiments, identify patterns and trends, and use that information to refine its models and make better predictions.
And crucially, it would be able to explain its reasoning to human scientists. It wouldn't just say, this molecule is likely to be effective. It would say, this molecule is likely to be effective because it binds to this target with this affinity, which disrupts this signaling pathway, which leads to this therapeutic effect. Being able to generate that kind of explanation is key to trust and collaboration.
Exactly. It needs to be able to justify its conclusions based on evidence and logic. It needs to be able to answer the question, why?
That's a really important point. Right now, a lot of AI is optimized for performance, not for explainability. But in science, explainability is just as important as performance, maybe even more so.
I think we're starting to see more research on explainable AI, though. There are techniques like LIME and SHAP that can help us understand which features are most important for a model's predictions. It's not perfect, but it's getting better.
It's a start, but I think we need to go beyond just identifying important features. We need to understand the causal relationships between those features. We need to know why those features are important.
And that's where symbolic reasoning comes in. If we can represent knowledge in a symbolic form, then we can use logical inference to reason about causal relationships and generate explanations.
It's also about how the AI represents information internally. Is it a big matrix of weights, or is it a more structured representation that reflects the underlying structure of the world? I suspect the latter is essential for true understanding.
Okay, so let's say we agree that we need to combine deep learning with symbolic reasoning and spatiotemporal understanding. How do we actually do that? What are the concrete steps we need to take?
I think we need to invest more in neuro-symbolic AI. That means developing algorithms that can seamlessly integrate neural networks with symbolic reasoning systems. We need to find ways to train neural networks to learn symbolic representations and to reason logically about those representations.
I think a key step is to try and understand the principles of biological intelligence. How does the brain represent knowledge? How does it reason? How does it learn? By studying the brain, we can gain valuable insights into how to build more intelligent machines.
I think we need to focus on developing algorithms that can translate between different representations of space and time. That means finding a way to unify the different coordinate systems that we use in science and engineering. We need a kind of universal translator for the world.
And I think we need to continue pushing the boundaries of deep learning. That means developing new architectures, training techniques, and data augmentation methods. We need to see how far we can go with purely data-driven approaches.
Yeah, I think it's important to explore all of these avenues. There's no single magic bullet for AGI. It's going to require a multifaceted approach, combining insights from neuroscience, computer science, and mathematics.
I agree, and we need to be realistic about the challenges. Building an AI co-scientist is a very ambitious goal. It's going to take a lot of time, effort, and resources, but I think it's a goal worth pursuing because the potential benefits are enormous.
Absolutely. Imagine an AI that could help us cure diseases, solve climate change, and explore the universe. It would be a game changer for humanity.
But we need to be careful. We need to ensure that these AI systems are aligned with our values and that they are used for good. We don't want to create something that ends up harming us.
That's a crucial point. Ethical considerations need to be at the forefront of AI research. We need to think about the potential risks and benefits of these technologies, and we need to develop safeguards to mitigate the risks.
It's a really exciting time to be working in AI. There's so much potential, but also so much responsibility.
So, let's delve a bit deeper into the practical applications. Otto, you mentioned drug discovery. Can you elaborate on how an AI co-scientist might revolutionize that field?
Sure. So currently, drug discovery is incredibly slow and expensive. It takes years and billions of dollars to bring a new drug to market. And AI could accelerate this process in several ways. First, it could analyze vast amounts of data on existing drugs, diseases, and biological pathways to identify potential drug targets. Second, it could design new molecules that are likely to interact with those targets. Third, it could simulate the effects of those molecules in a virtual environment, predicting their efficacy and toxicity. And fourth, it could analyze the results of clinical trials to identify patterns and trends, optimizing the drug development process. It would dramatically compress the timeline and improve the success rate.
But the simulations are only as good as the models they're based on.
and our understanding of biological systems is still incomplete. So, the AI might identify a promising drug target based on a flawed model, leading to wasted time and resources.
True, but the AI can also help us improve those models by identifying discrepancies between the simulations and the real world. It can use that information to refine the models and make them more accurate. It's an iterative process.
And that's where the spatiotemporal understanding comes in. We need to be able to model the interactions between molecules, cells, and tissues in a realistic way. That means taking into account the spatial arrangement of these components and the temporal dynamics of their interactions. It's not enough to just know that two molecules interact. We need to know where and when they interact.
Let's switch gears a little. How could an AI co-scientist contribute to climate change research?
Climate modeling is incredibly complex. You're dealing with a huge number of interacting variables, from atmospheric conditions to ocean currents to ice sheet dynamics. An AI could help us make sense of all this data by identifying patterns and trends that humans might miss. It could also help us develop more accurate climate models by incorporating new data and refining existing models.
But again, the models are only as good as the data they're based on. And there are still a lot of uncertainties in climate science. So, the AI might make predictions that are based on flawed data or incomplete models.
Right. But the AI could also help us quantify those uncertainties. It could run simulations with different sets of parameters and see how the results vary. That would give us a better sense of the range of possible outcomes.
And the AI could also help us identify the most effective strategies for mitigating climate change. It could simulate the effects of different policies, such as carbon taxes or renewable energy subsidies, and see which ones are most likely to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's a massive optimization problem, really.
And it could also help us develop new technologies for capturing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere or generating clean energy. It could analyze vast amounts of data on different materials and chemical reactions to identify potential solutions.
But we need to be careful about relying too heavily on AI. Climate change is a complex problem with both scientific and social dimensions. We need to make sure that we're taking into account the human element and not just relying on algorithms to tell us what to do.
Absolutely. AI should be a tool to help us make better decisions, not a replacement for human judgment.
Let's talk about the chain of draft concept that I've been exploring. I'm curious how you all think it might relate to building an AI co-scientist. The core idea is minimizing written text to accelerate thought processes. Could this be relevant to AI?
That's interesting. In deep learning, we often talk about the importance of efficient data structures and training algorithms. Could the chain of draft principle be applied to design more efficient ways for AI to process information, to extract information from datasets and build robust models? Instead of bombarding it with text, maybe you give it only the essential kernels?
I'm not sure it directly translates. The chain of draft is about streamlining human communication, right? AI doesn't necessarily think in the same way. I mean, reducing text might reduce the amount of data, but does it necessarily make the data more meaningful to the AI, or does it even need this?
The writing less as part of it strikes me as potentially relevant in a different way. If a more intelligent AGI is able to implicitly encode necessary information in its internal translations between different representations, it might potentially require fewer explicit computations. Maybe the AI just needs the key points to start reasoning.
That's what I was thinking, Donald. It's about reducing cognitive load, streamlining the information flow. Maybe we can design AI algorithms that mirror this efficiency, focusing on the core concepts and relationships, rather than getting bogged down in irrelevant details.
So, you're thinking it could lead to more concise internal representations within the neural network, which facilitates a faster learning trajectory.
But how does that scale? Does the reduction in writing create an inherent weakness when the problem space grows? What if the AI misses crucial nuances because it's only getting the bare minimum?
I think it depends on how the AI handles the translations between different representations. If it's able to efficiently move between abstract and concrete representations, it might be able to fill in the gaps and avoid missing crucial details. It's about how it expands those core drafts.
Right. It's about finding the right balance between conciseness and completeness. It's not about eliminating all writing, but about prioritizing the most important information and structuring it in a way that's easy for the AI to process. Think of it like a highly optimized prompt for a language model. Less fluff, more substance.
So, maybe the chain of draft concept could inform the design of more efficient training data for neural networks, reduce the redundant information, focus on the core concepts, and see if that leads to faster learning and better generalization.
Potentially, but I still think we need to address the fundamental limitations of deep learning, particularly its lack of explainability and its reliance on massive data sets. Streamlining the input data might help, but it's not a silver bullet.
And we need to think about how this approach interacts with the AI's ability to reason about space and time. Can we encode spatiotemporal relationships in a concise way so that the AI can learn them more efficiently?
Okay, let's pivot to future research directions. What are the key questions that we need to answer to make progress towards building an AI co-scientist? Sarah, what's your take?
I think we need to focus on developing more powerful and flexible neuro-symbolic algorithms. We need to find ways to seamlessly integrate neural networks with symbolic reasoning systems so that we can combine the strengths of both approaches. I'd love to see research on how to train neural networks to learn symbolic representations and how to use symbolic reasoning to guide the learning process. How do we build that bridge between these two paradigms?
I think we need to continue pushing the boundaries of deep learning. We need to develop new architectures, training techniques, and data augmentation methods that can improve the performance and robustness of these models. I'm particularly interested in exploring unsupervised and self-supervised learning techniques, which could allow us to train AI systems on much larger datasets without the need for manual labeling. The emergence of self-play is incredible, but we need to figure out other paradigms.
I think we need to focus on developing algorithms that can translate between different representations of space and time. We need to find a way to unify the different coordinate systems that we use in science and engineering. Maybe there is some translation kernel. More specifically, how can we quantify the distance between different coordinate systems? And more importantly, how can algorithms learn to effectively navigate that space in a way that is not brute force?
From my perspective, I think a critical area of research is understanding how the brain represents knowledge and how it reasons. We need to leverage insights from neuroscience to develop more biologically inspired AI algorithms. I'm particularly interested in exploring the potential of dynamic neural networks that can adapt and change based on sensory input, and in understanding how the brain integrates information from different modalities. And of course, how we can quantify the cognitive load reduction achieved by methods like the chain of draft, and whether neuroimaging techniques can reveal the underlying mechanisms.
Those are all excellent points. It seems like we have a lot of work to do, but I'm optimistic that we can make significant progress in the coming years.
It's a challenging but incredibly important endeavor.
Agreed. The potential rewards are enormous.
Okay, I think that's a good place to wrap things up. Thanks for joining me for this fascinating discussion. And thanks to our listeners for tuning in to Cognitive Spirals. We'll be back next week with another exploration of the frontiers of intelligence.